Would you like to be somebody who understands how to logically deduce the utility of the logos, which is articulating the truth, it is speech, it is logic? Then listen to this entire video where I start off with a quote which explains the natural state of the human mind and in chaos, in the unknown, in unconsciousness, and how using the logos transforms this unconscious chaos into conscious order, and how useful that is. So before we get into this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, Jungian psychology, and how to reduce suffering in life. Let's get into it. Now, there's a quote which really caught my mind. It goes as such: "An idle mind is the devil's workshop. An idle mind is the devil's workshop." Now, this quote caught my mind because I could definitely relate to it. Now, the quote basically says, in my interpretation, that when you're thinking and you're not doing anything else, so your mind is idle, not as in idle in like doing nothing, but you're not occupied with something, you're not focusing on something. So when you're just, let's say, sitting there and your mind is wandering, then the devil walks in. And what does the devil mean? There's many different interpretations, but you could maybe think evil thoughts come in, but to me it's more pain and suffering comes in. So like a negative emotion, not negative emotion, but you enter in a state of mind that is unwanted, you'd rather not have. Okay, so let's say you start thinking about uncomfortable things, which is obviously doesn't really create suffering, but it's uncomfortable, obviously. Now I thought, okay, well then that means that all thinking is uncomfortable, or just thinking freely is painful in some sense, but that can't be. So if we roll this back and we look at the state before thinking, if you're not thinking, you are, let's say, ignorant in some way. You're not really conscious. And I think this is the state you're in when you're not thinking. You are occupied with something. Maybe you're playing a computer game. Maybe you're also listening to music, or you're working on something. You're occupied, hence your mind is not really thinking. Your mind is not idle in that sense. And I noticed this myself. Like, I listen to music a lot. Whenever I'm not really doing anything specific, I'm listening to music, because it sort of blurs the thoughts in my mind, it clouds them, and I don't have to sort of like face them in some sense. And I think in this sense it would be face the devil in the thought, in my thoughts. So I tend to gravitate to listening to music, to occupying, to sort of sedating myself. Okay, so if we move away from the state, then we go to a state of thinking. This is pain, and yeah, you're facing uncomfortable thoughts. But then, okay, this doesn't kind of make sense. If all thoughts were painful, or if the idle mind were always engaged with the devil's workshop, then nobody would want to think permanently. You know, nobody would ever want to think. But that can't be. Surely, that would mean that being conscious, thinking, is a negative sum game. It is a game where you lose with certainty. You're basically in permanent pain then. But that's not true, because there is value in consciousness, I'm pretty sure. So it is the devil's sort of sorry, I made some notes here. I was thinking, okay, so maybe the devil's presence is an intermediate step between starting to be conscious and then reaping the value of being conscious. So you become conscious, then there's discomfort, but then there's some sort of reward afterwards. And I think that is what happens. And I think the devil's workshop is the intermediary. No, it's not. It's the intermediate step between chaos and order. And it is not that it's an intermediate step, but it is what happens when you engage in the chaos first, and then you need to apply logos, logic, speaking the articulated speech of the truth, That's what turns then this chaos, this devil's workshop, into value, into order. Because what it is you're facing, when you're not thinking, you're avoiding facing some sort of thoughts. And the thoughts are chaotic. You don't understand them, you don't know what they're going to be, hence it's the unknown, it's chaotic. But when you start thinking about them, you process them, you articulate the thoughts, and then you transform them from chaos into order. And that's the value. Because without the thinking, there would be no order. You'd be ignorant. Everything would work outside of your control, and you have no control over it, or you don't understand it in any sense. So I thought, okay, there's something in here. Facing this discomfort, these thoughts, this uncertainty, is painful, it's frightening. But thinking about it is the first step to solving the issue at hand. I mean, because if you're running away from something in your thoughts, it means there's a problem at hand, obviously, and the way to alleviate the problem is to solve it. So we would need people to solve these problems. I mean, it would be optimal if everybody could solve it themselves, because everybody has problems. So, okay, what characteristics determine whether you engage in the chaos, in your thoughts, in the devil's workshop, or you don't engage in them? Because that's key to understand. That would be key to figure out. And I think I've come up with 3 key traits that are likely to determine your ability to speak or to act out the logos and engage in the chaotic thoughts, the dark thoughts of your mind. And before we get into this, I want to first describe a little bit of the dark thoughts. I mean, the list, the bandwidth of dark thoughts is essentially infinite. It could be anything. It could be uncertainty about the future. You don't know what to do with your life, which is sort of my case right now. Then there's your relationships. Maybe your relationships are a mess and they need to be solved, or you're responsible for the decay of the relationships, and accepting that is painful. Then there's dissatisfaction, general dissatisfaction in life. Things aren't going the way you want because of your behavior, and you don't really want to take responsibility for it. And these are 3 examples of why sedating the thought would be, in the short term, more pleasant than engaging in it, and sort of keeping the devil outside of the workshop in your mind. So to avoid having an idle mind and actually thinking about these things and actually solving them. Okay, so what are 3 characteristics that might determine your ability to act out the logos, to speak articulated truth? I think 1 is courage. Obviously, because, as I said, engaging in these thoughts and processing them is painful and quite frightening. So you would need courage to engage in them, because you need to face the chaos of this uncertainty in your thoughts, the unclarity, the darkness of it. And trust me, the human psyche, the brain, is, I would potentially say, one of the densest, darkest abysses that you can find in the world, including anything in nature that is dark. I think what lies in your mind is darker and denser than anything else. So it's no joke when you talk about engaging in your thoughts. It's frightening. Okay, that's one thing, courage, which is sort of like what a hero would have. Second thought, I think, is conscientiousness, because in case you're anxious about the uncertainty, you force upon yourself the need to solve it, to face the problem and formulate it by thinking about it, because it's obviously a problem in your life. And if you're conscientious, you sort of enslave yourself to make sure you solve it, because you're industrious and you don't like the disorder, the chaos of it. You can't really handle it, so you need to sort of force yourself to solve it. That's another thing. And I also think instinct, because you're naturally, as a human, primed to survive. So thinking helps you formulate problems and allows you to solve the problem. And the more problems you solve, the higher your rate of survival, because everybody is faced with problems in life. Society is faced with problems, and depending on your ability to solve them, mediates your survival. Because if you can't solve your problems, problems will devour you to a degree, and then you'll sort of die earlier in some sense. And because we're primed to perpetuate our genes, we need to survive. So if you're able to solve problems, well, then you have a high rate of survival, and that's an instinct we have. We are inclined, we have this proclivity to want to solve problems because it keeps us alive. And the thing is, if you don't articulate a problem, you can't solve it, because the universe is so complex. If you're subjected to some sort of problem, the probability that you find a solution without articulating it, and that solution actually solving the problem is the probability is close to non-existent. Because if you don't articulate the problem, you could think, okay, let me start working on a solution without having articulated it. But then the likelihood of that solution actually solving the problem is so small, because the characteristics that are attributed to the problem are so specific. And that's what I would say even constitutes a problem. It is a idiosyncratic concept. It is individual, and it has its specific traits. So the probability of you randomly finding traits that will solve the traits of the problem is just close to non-existent. So I think this is literally what life is all about. Turning the unknown into the known with logos. This is also what Carl Jung understood under the process of individuation, which is bringing the contents of your unconscious mind into your conscious mind, and what he sort of deemed as would enable you to become godlike. This is obviously an ideal, but he deemed that as the most valuable thing in life, to integrate the unconscious contents, so your archetypes, for example, or archetypal contents, into your mind. And that's essentially I think the most fundamental distinction in life is between order and chaos. And the more you can transform chaos into order, the more area you can, I don't want to use the word dominate because that has a negative connotation, but to understand and comprehend. And if you understand and comprehend something, you can work with it. But if you don't understand it, you are the slave to the chaos, and the chaos is your master, and you have no control over it. Whether if you understand this area that is unknown in all figurative senses, then you are able to work with it and actually do something about it. Now, to understand a little bit more of what the logos is the thing that turns chaos into order, and sort of at the beginning of time. It is the word of God. It is also Christ. It is what you find in the beginning of the Bible. So logos is articulated truth. It is speech. It is speaking the truth. It is what protects you from the dangers of life. It is what protects you best out of all measures of protection against the dangers of life. It is what's the most potent method. And just to sort of explain what happened in the beginning of time according to the Bible, this is sort of the first few sentences from Genesis in the Bible. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness." So here's a clear distinction between darkness and light. Chaos, the darkness, and light, the order. And the word speaking is what transformed the chaos into order. Out of nothing, out of pure chaos, there was suddenly a light. Because God spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. And this is also, I think this is sort of the coherent or ongoing theme in Christianity, is the most valuable thing is speaking the truth. Yeah. And the opposite of logos is what creates chaos out of order in return. It is essentially lying, not speaking the truth. And it turns order back into the natural state of chaos, along with the force of entropy. Entropy is this natural force that tends to, I think, make energy, it sort of makes energy disperse and go into like a natural state of chaos from order. It like declines. Yes. So, in conclusion, logos, speaking the truth, is like the ideal of turning chaos into order, and it is the necessary step for yourself to reduce the uncertainty or the amount of like clouded thoughts and problems in your mind into articulated problem statements, and allows you to solve them. Because we have a tendency to not want to engage in our thoughts, and like the quote I said in the beginning, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Like when you're idle in your mind, when you're like not occupied with anything, your mind drifts and you start engaging in dark thoughts. And these dark thoughts are because your mind is like an abyss and you have a lot of problems in your life which you might not be facing, and they start arising then, and then the devil starts working. And that's the first step though. Engaging in that is the first step of the logos, because you engage in the chaos, in the problem, and then you think about the problem and you articulate what the problem is, which allows you to solve it, and then you can solve it and create order out of that. And that's logos. It's about speaking, articulating the truth. And I think three key characteristics that enable you to do that is courage, because it's frightening to engage in the abyss of your psyche. And then conscientiousness can occur because conscientious people do not like disorder, and the idle mind, or the original state of human being being unconscious, is disorder. And finally, instinct, because solving problems is what keeps humanity alive, I think. Yes, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, Jungian psychology, and how to reduce suffering in life. Please leave a comment below if you have experienced yourself what the logos is and how you've actually used the logos in your past to solve your problems and turn chaos into order in a literal sense. So thank you for listening.